Hi guys, welcome back again. This is Jade, Andro Padullon from DC1B, and I am here yet again to have another chance to talk about Rizal. So this is the third and final part of my blog discussing about the life and works of Rizal. A quick recap: in the first video we have discussed about his biography. In the second video we tackled about a philosophical belief focusing on his economic convictions. And now, in this final video, we will discuss some of his famous works such as his essays, novels, pamphlets, plays, and other things. So to be clear, we will be discussing his works entitled Filipinas dentro de 100 años, Por Telefono, La Vicion del Frei Rodriguez, Sobrella indolencia de los Filipinos, No le metangere, and of course, El filibusterismo. This will be a fun ride, so sit back, listen, and let's learn more about Rizal. Rizal wrote a lot of poems and novels throughout his life. He was a well-known writer and was one of the most celebrated here in our country. His works such as the No le metangere, El filibusterismo, and Mi Ultimo Adios were regarded as literary treasures and were considered a big part of our rich history. He also wrote several essays during his stint as one of the writers of the Filipino newspaper La Solidaridad. They were considered literary treasures here in our country and were widely celebrated by the Filipinos. He authored famous literary works, mostly political, and inspired the Philippine Revolution, and ultimately led to his execution by the Spanish colonizers. The first work of Rizal that we will talk about is Filipinas dentro de 100 años. In September 30, 1889, an essay of Rizal titled Filipinas dentro de 100 años was published in La Solidaridad. Filipinas de 100 años, which can be translated as The Philippines a Century Hence, contains Rizal's ideas and predictions on what would the Philippines looks like a century after. He made lasting impressions on the Philippines during this time and made assumptions or predictions as to what our country would look like in the future. He was very optimistic in his stand about the future of the country. Filipinas dentro de 100 años was a four-part essay by Rizal which intended to remind Spain what would happen if their relationship with the Philippines if the maltreatment continues. Rizal predicted several events that would happen to the Philippines. First is that the country would eventually gain independence from Spain. Second, there would be an uprising or revolt that will happen against Spain if the Filipinos are ignored. Third is that America would gain interest in the Philippines and will buy it from Spain. All the predictions that he said somewhat happened to the Philippines. In the first part of his essay, Rizal speaks about how cunning the Spanish are, making themselves sort of a peacemaker of the Filipinos, though they were stabbing the country at the back through their hidden motives. They were trusted but failed to fulfill their promises. They mistreated the Filipinos and abused them to the point where the traditions, culture, and other things were forgotten by the next generation because the Spanish instilled in the minds of the Filipinos their might and power, as well as them being the leaders or superiors. Another is that what would happen to our motherland sooner or later? Would it be a province of Spain or would it become an independent country? He also emphasized that a lot of countries would take interest in the Philippines. This question somewhat shows the eagerness of Rizal to see what would happen to our country. It was said that he was fighting for us to be recognized as one of the provinces of Spain so that we will be treated equally and that this can help the country improve by leaps and bounds. This also signified that he wanted what he thinks the best of the country and the Filipino people. In the second part, Rizal spoke about whether the Philippines would still be a colony of Spain or not. Here he emphasized how the Spanish treated the Filipinos and how they belittled us and called our ancestors barbaric and uncivilized. On the other hand, Rizal believed that our ancestors are majestic people and that they are very incredible and brave and true-blooded warriors. He kept speaking about freedom and that the Philippines should have been given independence by the Spaniards. He also spoke about the freedom of speech and other things. In the third part, Rizal stated that if we are still under the colony of Spain, there should be a change that should happen. There should be a change in a government from militaristic to a government that would sympathize with and helps the Filipinos. He wanted a government that would listen to the demands of the Filipino people. The removal of abusive and corrupt members of the government must also be observed. Rizal wanted the Philippines to be equally treated as those of the provinces in Spain, and he wanted the Filipinos to experience a peaceful life where they are not oppressed or being pressured to a certain point. The fourth part of his essay continued to talk about this idea or mindset about the supposed government in the Philippines, where there is equality and proper governance. He also warned that if there would be a misalignment or slight abuse of power, there would be a conflict that would result in a violent, destructive clash between the Filipinos and the Spaniards. He also stated that they would still succumb later and the Philippines would eventually get its independence and freedom. He believed that it is impossible to destroy or vanquish the Filipino race, though a lot may die as a sacrifice. There will still be a lot left who can continue fighting and would preserve our culture, traditions, and identity. Reading it made me realize that Rizal wanted to show Spain how persistent the Filipinos are, that we are going to fight no matter what happens to gain our freedom. Overall, the essay of Rizal, Filipinas Dentro de 100 Años, was a piece that represents the Filipino people and contains the things that Rizal is looking forward to happening, as well as his predictions on what would happen to our country sooner or later. Rizal, writing this novel, shows how patriotic he is and how he loves our country and the Filipinos dearly. The second novel that we will talk about is Por Telefono. Por Telefono was a satirical comedic play that was written by Rizal in 1889 about Father Font during his stay in Madrid. This play was written by Rizal as a means of reply to the slanderer of his novel, Noli Me Tangere, Father Salvador Font, which eventually led to the banning of the novel. This play was full of symbolistic meanings and unveils how the friars have lived their life. Rizal writes as if from the future and with satire and irony condemns the rule of the friars in his day. Rizal sent this manuscript to Mariano Ponce, and under his direction it was published in Barcelona in 1889. The play contains the dark side of the friar, opting to be sent to the Philippines instead of staying in Madrid, as friars who are in the Philippines are living in a life of luxury and was well respected by the Filipinos. They talk about the things that they want and the problems that they are facing from the other side of the world. One of the friars that wanted to go back to Manila as he thinks that Madrid is doomed and that he misses a life around a beautiful woman. Reading this made me feel a sense of disgust from the Frei, who is known in our history as people who abuse the Filipino people, strip our ancestors of their land, and women being raped or prone to sexual abuse. The play written by Rizal showed the cunningness of the friar and their thirst for wealth and respect. It also showed the discrimination that they have against the natives, and that they are always checked by the higher officials, and that they may be exiled when they are suspected, or when the natives are reporting them to the officials. This means that they are in danger, or they should be worried of the people around them. Rizal imposed that, or proved that the natives are well respected in Spain, and they are being heard by the government as it should be. Overall, the Por Telefono is a play that he created as a means of reply to Father Salvador Font, who slandered his novel Noli Me Tangere, which resulted in it being banned. The play itself showed who the friars are and how they have lived their life, especially here in the Philippines. Their thirst for power and wealth and their cravings for beautiful women. They somewhat treat the Philippines as paradise, where they can do all they want. The third work of Rizal that I will be discussing today is La Vicion del Frei Rodriguez. So La Vicion del Frei Rodriguez was a satirical pamphlet that was written by Rizal in London and was published in Barcelona in 1888. He wrote this as a reply to Frei Rodriguez's bitter attack on his novel Noli Me Tangere. Rizal wrote this as a counterattack to the irrational criticisms of Father Rodriguez on Noli. La Vicion del Frei Rodriguez is a satire depicting a spirited dialogue between Saint Augustine and Frei Rodriguez. In this pamphlet, he demonstrated his profound knowledge in religion and biting satire. The pamphlets talk about Frei Rodriguez and Saint Augustine having a dialogue where the saint criticized the priest about their actions and beliefs that did not correspond to priesthood. Way back in time, where we are under the control of the Spaniards, the friars were very powerful and they imposed many rules that makes the life of the Filipino people more difficult. The rules they impose are selfish and in a way advantageous to them, and they say it as a part of God's rule or the church rule when the Filipinos will listen, as they are very good devotees of the church and that they are afraid of being punished. This showed no morality and abuse in their power as leaders of the church which did not correspond to the teaching of the church. In their conversation, Saint Augustine goes on to great length of criticizing the friars' deficiency in understanding the Christian teachings and doctrines. This depicted here that the saints are disappointed by the actions of the friars as they should have been leaders of faith, but instead they became people who are blinded by power, lust, and money, and even using the name of the church to scam people. To sum it up, La Vicion del Frei Rodriguez was like poor Telefono, who Rizal wrote it as a reply to the friars who criticized his novel Noli Me Tangere. This was his way of exposing the abuses and the immoral doings of the friars in the Philippines. His novel Noli was called as a heretical by Frei Rodriguez, which is very illogical from the part of the friar. It just meant that they are guilty of what was written in the novel. The fourth work of Rizal that I will be discussing in this video is sobre la indolencia de los Filipinos. La indolencia de los Filipinos, or best known as the Indolence of the Filipinos, is one of the literary works Rizal wrote as a 5-piece essay for La Solidaridad, which was published in 1890. He wrote this to respond and examine the alleged idleness of his people during the Spanish colonization and to deliver blunt realities to awaken his countrymen to their faults, while also urging the Spanish rule to remedy the flaws in the system adopted by the government. This essay also contained the observations of Rizal on the behaviors of the Filipinos past and present in his time and the causes why people did not, as was said, work hard during the Spanish regime. In his essay, Rizal refused to believe that the Filipinos have always been viewed as indolent. He depicted that Filipinos were active in trade with neighboring and distant countries, commerce and agriculture in the pre-Spanish era. However, Filipinos were stomped as the people who have little love for work and lack energy by the Spaniards. Rizal emphasized that indolence does not exist among the Filipinos, but this was the result of how the Spanish regime governed at the time. This trait connects to what was the living status of the Filipinos under the Spaniards. Certain causes were presented by Rizal which he observed were the reason for the indolence of the Filipinos. I learned a lot from reading his essays and it inspired me to do better as a Filipino. I believe that Rizal wrote this essay for us to reflect and look back to find out who we are and to prove that we are not indolent. We should all be treated equally and we should not let other countries belittle and disrespect us. We need to be aware of our rights and be responsible citizens who think of the welfare of the country and someone who loves his country as he loves himself. La Indolencia de los Filipinos was a way of Rizal defending us and at the same time attacking the Spaniards. He wanted to prove that the Filipinos are not indolent, such as what the friars are saying, that we are lazy. In his essay, we can feel that he truly respected his fellow Filipinos and that he is proud of being one. He fought valiantly and everything that he wrote is factual and something that the Spaniards overlooked and rejected the statement of the Spaniards that they were lazy and wanted to be idle all day without working under the heat of the sun. The next work of Rizal that we'll be discussing in this video is Noli Me Tangere. So Noli Me Tangere was written by Rizal in 1884 and was published in 1887. It swept and brutally unmasked the corruption and abuse done by the Spaniards. It brilliantly described the Philippine society during the Spanish rule through the memorable characters that Rizal introduced. The melancholic state of Maria Clara, the insanity of Sisa showed the miserable state of our country. Many said that reading Noli can open one's mind to tyranny and oppression. This novel has Crisostomo Ibarra, a young Filipino, came back home after learning the death of his father, Don Rafael Ibarra, who was accused by Padre Damaso. The earlier chapters were very fantastic as they showed the essence of the novel. The poeticism of Rizal was shown in every term that he used. The overall impact of the novel is about love, not only romantic love for Ibarra and Maria Clara, but also love for the country and family. We Filipinos know love from an early age. We tend to love our family, friends, and the community. And as I read the novel, the love for our country surged, and I felt pain in my heart thinking about the struggles that our ancestors faced at the hands of the Spaniards. Issues of political framework was also shown in the novel. For example, the unjust trial that just given to the father of Crisostomo Ibarra, who was just accused by Padre Damaso, whom he has a conflict with. This novel was written by Rizal to fight for our freedom and to let the world know that the harassment that we have experienced at the hands of the Spaniards. It presented the grief and suffering that the Filipinos have felt. It can be seen through Sisa, who suffered a lot and even led to her losing her mind just to find her sons, especially Crispin, who was accused of the Sacristan Mayor of stealing and is believed to have died at his hands. The abuse of power was present in the novel, and it was just heartbreaking to see Sisa struggle a lot from the abuse she received from her husband and losing her children. Noli Me Tangere is a novel that marked the start of Rizal's fighting for the freedom of the Filipino people. He used several characters as symbols to represent our country and the sufferings that our ancestors have experienced. It exposed and embarrassed the friars who are involved in a lot of abuses and corruption. It also represented the love for our country and for the family as represented by Ibarra and Sisa. The novel is somewhat heartbreaking, but it tackled everything that needs to be tackled, and it threatened the friars who are in the Philippines to the point that Fray Rodriguez declared it as a work of a heretic. Overall, the Noli Me Tangere is a novel that marked the start of Rizal's fighting for the freedom of the Filipino people. He used several characters as symbol to represent the country and the sufferings that our ancestors have experienced. We are fortunate to be able to read this meaningful masterpiece, and we are lucky to have someone like Rizal to fight for our country. So the last work of Rizal that I will be sharing in this video is El Filibusterismo. El Filibusterismo was the second novel that was written by Rizal and was published in 1891. It was a sequel to his novel Noli Me Tangere, which he wrote as a dedication to the three martyrs priests of the Cavite Mutiny in 1872, which is Father Jose Burgos, Father Jacinto Zamora, and Father Mariano Gomez. This novel was depicted to be dark, satirical, full of revenge, unfulfilled love, and tragedy. The novel takes place 13 years after the events of Noli Me Tangere, and Crisostomo Ibarra, who suffered a lot, is now a mysterious jeweler called Miss Simon, who gained the favor of the Governor General. This novel of Rizal talks a lot about politics and governmental issues in our country. It targets the Spanish government directly, and this was a lot different from Noli, which focuses on the romance and love. The novel tells us about how cruel the Spaniards are, and it tackles the bravery of the Filipino community such as Cabezon Tales, where he fought those people who tried to claim his land, even though he will be punished, which represents the greediness of the Spaniards. The novel was too deep that I can feel the emotion surging from it, especially from the characters that are trying their best to fight for our country. I was indulged in reading the novel, and I felt like I was part of the campaign of Simon, who grew and matured a lot, though his heart is full of hatred and revenge. It was like he was a real human that transformed into a wicked person after having a trauma in his life or after experiencing a very heartbroken in his life. This was most likely written by Rizal to show us that what would revenge and chaos would bring to us and how one develops these kinds of emotions. I know that we all want to do good things and we all want to be good people who can choose what is right over what is wrong. Being a good person is fulfilling, not totally in the sense of blessings, but in a sense that we know what we did is good and our heart just feels so light about it. There are a lot of issues discussed in the novel, and one is the occupation of the Cabezang Tales, which resulted in a point where he killed those who oppressed him, which will prove to be shown how greedy the Spaniards can be, as they would occupy all the things that they see, and that would make the Filipinos poor. Overall, Dr. Jose Rizal wanted to show us to do our best, but to never tie up ourselves in doing bad. The filibusterismo also shared the violence that is not the answer to the problem that we encountered in our life. From what I have observed, the filibusterismo is dark and brutal, with many happenings of killing, sexual abuse, and suicide. We must think of it. We should not lower ourselves to that level to cover ourselves in violence and rage or anger. The second novel of his taught me a lot, and it would always remind me that revenge is not good, for it may blind you, and even lead to greater tragedy, where people will be involved, though they are not included. This novel is a lesson for us, and allowed us to learn to never plant hatred, as it will cause more grief. So, we are finished with the third part of this vlog series, and I'm sure you have learned a lot about the life and works of Rizal. You may share your ideas about this topic by writing your comment down below. Before I end this vlog, I would like to tell everyone that we should be proud of who we are, and there is nothing to be ashamed of being a Filipino, as our ancestors were proud of being a Filipino, and we should be also like them, that we should contribute to the betterment of our country and avoid being a cancer that can destroy us. So that's all for me, and once again, this is Jade, Andro, Padullon, and I'm proud to be a Filipino. Thank you.